We have time for questions, so we'll open it up, and we'll take two at a time. I'd like to start. We have a microphone as well.
Hi, I have a question for Mark Driscoll. No, I was really interested in your conceptualization about the Hegelian extra action, and I was wondering, because it sounds so important, because it's not a coincidence that dialectics is so tied up with capital, so I found it really, really enlightening. But I was wondering if you could tell me, how do you articulate the extra action with the topic of, in Hegel's logic, of positing the presuppositions, this idea that basically the subject puts there what is presupposed, that is this extra thing out there, the colonies, these peripheries that are there posed by capital, in the same sense that capitalism in this retroactive movement that is depicted in the first volume of Capital, money generating more money and then retroactively generating its own presuppositions. Is there a way of articulating this idea, these dialectical ideas in the logic with the theory of the extraction, and what are the geopolitical consequences of this?
That's a great question. Yeah, what's your first name?
Orlando.
Orlando,
You
that's
do questions?
Yeah, do you want to take one more before?
Yeah, sure, I'll. So Mariko, thanks for the great paper. So what's the work that imperialism, first of all, I don't know what, can you explain what's the value added of ecological? This just sounds like imperialism as we've known it. And secondly, what's the work that imperialism does to resolve the surplus capital problem? Because you go to destruction, but that's not why it's useful for capital accumulation. And maybe connect with other people who have been working, certainly in the World-Ecology tradition, on this, which is very different from basically all the other political economy traditions, because we take this question of imperialism as absolutely central. You have a microphone.
Yeah, Orlando, this is, yeah, that's a great question. There's really two, it's been a while since I've read the logic, but what I'm remembering is, I think, just to put it back into what Marx would say, the idea from the logic that's also in the phenomenology is imposing an idea. Marx wants to turn this around, right? He's going to say, no, wait a minute, in nature and labor, there's always going to be an extraction first. That happens first, exactly opposite to the extra active move that Kant and Hegel are going to say. They're going to start with extra action, then Hegel especially, move through interaction, and then back up with a more sophisticated machinery of extra action. Marx will say that's not right. It starts the other way, and therefore the struggle should be with living with historical natures and living labor.
I think one of the main reasons why, okay, bring in ecology, it is just imperialism, right? And imperialism has always been ecological. I think one of the main things is that it's actually not so much for the left, but for the mainstream conversations on sustainability to explicitly bring in the ecological dimension to show that that sustainability really is a myth under capitalism if imperialism is the underlying system that is allowing the entire system to function, right? So in a sense, it's really to engage with non-Marxists. That's why I'm bringing explicitly ecology into this conversation. You know, I think from a Marxist position, you wouldn't necessarily, it's just imperialism, like you said. The other question, now I've kind of forgotten the second question.
Well, I mean, imperialism, what does imperialism do for the surplus capital problem? And does it have anything to do with you know, Marx and Capital 3 and the tendency towards underproduction and the crises of cheap nature. Is there anything, any conversation that you're in the midst of, or are you just sort of going someplace else? For the video, the sound.
Yeah, microphone.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm gonna have to think a little bit more deeply about that question before I answer it. It's kind of complicated because I'm not coming from a place of talking about imperialism like it's happening because of just one dynamic, and that's been, you know, it's not just a relief from overaccumulation because of underconsumption by the working class, right? So I think there's a lot of dynamics driving the imperialism part. I don't know if that was quite getting to your point though, but.
I know we have one question over here.
Yes, hi. My name is Elena.
No.
Is it not on? Sorry.
Voilà.
Yes, I was looking forward to Mariko's talk, particularly because I deal with mining in Spain. And what I would like to consider is the possibility of not so much peripheral natures, but the fact that especially in the extractive industry, the mining frontier is actually moving to Europe. There's a whole area there. I just would like to make you aware, I'm not going to now talk about it now, but it's basically you just need to be aware that, particularly because of financialization, the frontier is actually moving to Europe. I mean, yesterday we had to talk about the Finnish situation. Portugal and Spain is exactly in the same situation, whereas ghost projects are being thrown into the market for capitalization of mining companies without any experience whatsoever, just because of this lazy money being floating around. And it's basically a fraud. I mean, obviously, the ultimate consequence of that is to say, oh, well, if they're not real projects, it's happening in Africa, it's happening everywhere. So it's this situation about the global north and the global south being obviously not a geographical divide, but the idea of who is exploiting and who is being exploited. I just would like to make you aware that I fight these projects. I'm a legal consultant. I just fight this project, and it's happening in Europe, and it's extraordinary. So I just would like to make you aware of this peripheral, what is actually going on in that respect, because of financialization.
So we also have another question here.
So I don't know whether you have anything to comment on that.
Yeah, I have a question to, can I say Wiwit? You have this title, Broken Dreams, and you have so much more in your PowerPoint which you couldn't develop. So could you develop a bit more? Who promised what and how was it broken?
To who?
Okay, we'll do another one.
Yeah, Mark, you talked about certainly what was definitely a military-industrial complex of the flipper ships and the coolie labor and finance. But I'm just curious why you call that the first military-industrial complex, because if we look back at Spanish and Portuguese colonialism, that was a pretty robust military-industrial complex spanning two hemispheres and and so on. So I'm just curious if that was like kind of a throwaway line, or if you have a case to make that this is more developed or robust or different from the earlier moment.
All right, Uncle Freddie, hand it over. I don't want to. My question is for Laura. I really was struck by your advocacy for personhood for trees. I'm a big fan of the trees. But I had a couple of thoughts on that. One was, there's this, especially in light of Lucy's presentation this morning, there's more than just the single trees. And it's, there's the forest as well. We can't lose sight of the forest for the sake of an individual tree. Was one thought that I had. Thank you. And then the other thought is, the class analysis that has to come along with this, in the sense that, I mean, like the people that Wiwit is about to talk about their broken dreams that rely on the trees of the palm trees and the oil trees and all of this, and that there's so much more, only some people are able to consider the idea of personhood for trees. And after having spent last weekend in the redwood forest, I'm really deeply attuned to this. But there's a piece of it I think that needs to be elucidated on a little more.
Thank you for the comment, and I totally agree. I am aware that the frontier is being pushed into the so-called global north. I was living in Utah for the past 3 years and was involved in the Bears Air kind of environmental activism, where a lot of the mining companies are going into land in southern Utah. I think there's a couple of things. We have to trace where the money is going. Because a lot of the multinational, not like the money from the multinational corporations are necessarily trickling down to the poor in the global north either, but a lot of the multinational corporations are headquartered in the global north, or in Africa's case, in South Africa. So we have the capital flowing out of the countries. And one of the studies I looked at was talking about, so on the one hand, we have to look where the capital is flowing out of, where the resources are flowing out of. And we also have to look at the taxation laws. In one study I looked at, there was a commodity boom in African commodity metals and minerals when the prices boomed. And because Australia is a big mining export country, it had higher taxations and was able to tax these multinational corporations. And they compared it with African countries that do not have these structures, that have been cracked open under SAPs. And the countries really made hardly any money at all. And so that's kind of a difference between mining in the global north and the global south. But one big thing is that what I just said also doesn't take into account the class-based analysis within the global north, because I'm also aware of the fact that money in the multinational corporations is not just trickling down to the poor people in the global north either. So that is something that is a similarity. Does that make sense?
Actually, in Spain, the taxation is 1%. So it's in Portugal, so in Finland it's been lowered. So it's not exactly like that everywhere, because it's a public interest activity over any other economic activity. So the taxation situation, I can talk to you about it later, but it's not exactly like that everywhere.
Thank you for the question. What I meant by broken promises, generally we can see in the cases of the scheme mode, or as well as in independent smallholders mode, that they were giving the hope that there will be successful farmers, which means that if they have like 2 hectares, then they can like accumulate and then expand their line into like become a middle size farmers, and then they can send their usually the successful farmer, usually they started as a transmigrant from Java usually to Sumatra, and the latest case of successful farmer, they were able to send their children to the university in Java, which is considered as a better university. But because of the low prices as well as the setback of the state, so they were less supported by the government, especially in the case of the scheme farmers. So they have to fight for themselves in terms of finding good fertilizer, finding good seeds, and especially the marketing network. If it's the scheme farmer, yes, they can sell their production to the company, which is the partner of their production. But in the case of independent smallholders, they have to fight for themselves. First, they were given the hope to be this the successful farmer, being from this only 2 hectares and with the hope to accumulate into more land. But again, these independent farmers started their business in 1998 when the oil palm need like 5 years to develop before they can be harvested. And by the time they are in that stage, it's about 2003, the price is already like going down. And now it's only like, if I converted the price of 1 kilo of fresh fruit bunch, it's only like, it's 500 rupiah, so it's like 0.5 cents in US dollar for 1 kilo. So all the farmers, they now, that's why the result of the election is that yellow thing when I show you. It's because they were like so frustrated, and they were already give up, and they don't want to like harvesting their plantation. So they ended up, because they already like have credits. I mean, they have to borrow money to get fertilizer, good seeds, not good seeds actually for the independent farmers. So yeah, they were at loss, and they lost also their land. Now the price is really low, even though in the international market is still quite high.
The red door on top.
Oh, Lori, go ahead. Yeah, you should.
Look, I just want to thank you for your question, and I definitely agree 100% that the forest is equally as important as the trees themselves. In my process, I used a phenomenological methodology in which I bracketed so many things. There's so many ways that trees are interconnected, as you mentioned, with the mycorrhizal networks, the mushrooms, all of the other species, human societies and cultures. But I chose to kind of bracket those things to really look at trees in the Western paradigm. And I think that is also something that I wanted to bring up in terms of the class issues that you mentioned. Something like 1.6 billion people around the world are dependent on forests. And I do agree that not everyone's really able to consider personhood for trees. And I think my focus is more that Western paradigm when I'm kind of considering in the Western paradigm. And I could give a little more about how that, kind of the Western colonialization has, deforestation has really tracked that pattern. And so I see connections there between that Western mindset, which I'm tracking kind of from the philosophical lineage, and as it's my own lineage as well, and making those connections. And with the personhood in particular, I'm actually personally a little critical of the personhood language. Specifically, I have some questions around it. So Matthew Hall is the one who really, his book is Plants as Persons, so he's really making that argument. But I think there's some nuances around personhood itself that need to be addressed a little more intentionally. And I'm really making the argument for ontological value and looking at trees differently in that way, like ontologically. So we can talk more, but that's a quick answer. Thank you.
I know we're going over, but time for Mark. Quickly.
20 seconds. Yeah. Just the thing, Yemen now, British and U.S. arms traffickers are profiting off just an astounding human and ecological crisis there. That started with the first war for drugs, the first opium war. Specifically, if we can send a shock and awe message, we know there's a lot of surplus money here, these people are going to buy our weapons. The U.S. invasion of Japan was done specifically that way. The asymmetrical war was way over the top. The Japanese had never seen a ship half as big as the 4 ships that invaded Tokyo at that time. The point was to try to sell. So the military-industrial complex isn't just about a domestic relation. It's about, in some sense, supporting arms traffickers globally. Hence, we have the situation with Saudi Arabia today. People like Bolton want a war now in Venezuela or Iran to renew the spike in Boeing and other for U.S. weapons manufacturers.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. My apologies to those who still had questions.